afternoon. 53 people have already joined. Let's start the class and I'll join in between others, okay?
मैनुअल गियरबॉक्स है जो कि
Good afternoon. Today's topic is poliomyelitis. I'm Dr. Prabha, lecturer from the Department of Pediatrics. I hope you are able to hear me.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So this was a common scenario prior to the polio eradication era. Okay?
Ma'am, waiting room मा साथीहरु कुरिरहेको छ रे आउनु गर्दैछ रे
ओके मैले यहाँबाट थाहा नपाएर हो ओके Okay, I'll try my best to join. Okay. Right now there is no one, okay. Okay, I'll start now, okay? Otherwise we will not have much time. Okay. So the poliovirus is a virus. It's a member of enterovirus group of Picornaviridae family and has 3 serotypes: poliovirus 1, poliovirus 2, and poliovirus 3 type, all of which can cause paralysis. Of all 3, type 1 is the most common one, which is causing the paralysis type of paralytic polio. Type 3 is less responsible for causing paralytic polio, and type 2 is the rarest one causing the paralytic polio. Now, if we see the epidemiology, incubation 10 days is the incubation period, and it can last from 4 to 35 days. And the virus is shed in the stools for 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, so a person can shed the virus for 2 months, and you see the route is fecal-oral route. Humans are the only reservoir of poliovirus. Okay, and the infection spreads from human to human. There is no animal reservoir. Okay. Immunity is acquired through infection with the wild virus and through immunization. So So Global Polio Eradication Initiative was started in 1988 using oral polio vaccine. So as a result of global incidence of polio has decreased to 99%, and now the task remains to tackle only the remaining 1%. So see, the vaccination has drastically reduced the incidence of polio and has changed the scenario of the world. Now we see those disabilities very rarely. Okay, so So there was a new strategy brought known as polio endgame strategy. It had 4 pillars of polio eradication. So the first pillar was routine immunization with the oral polio vaccine. Then supplementary immunization. In between, pulse immunization was given in between the regular routine immunization. Surveillance. So acute flaccid paralysis surveillance is regularly carried out by WHO throughout the world to end polio. Basically, they diagnose polio from FP surveillance. Then is a targeted mop-up campaign. So whenever there is an outbreak somewhere, they do a mop-up campaign with a vaccination again. So Nepal saw its last case of polio paralysis caused by an indigenous wild polio virus in 2000, and there was no polio case reported after that till 2004. After that, there were 4 to 6 polio cases every year from 2004 to 2008 every year, and then in 2009 there was no case, and again in 2010 there was 1 case. So last case of polio was detected at Rotahat in district Rotahat in 2010, and Nepal was finally declared polio free 4 years after, that is in 2014. Okay, so in 2013 the Nepal endorsed 2013 Nepal endorsed the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, Polio Eradication and Endgame Strategy 2013 to 2018 to support the effort for global polio eradication, and 2014 IPV, injectable polio vaccine, was added in our schedule. So if you see the pathogenesis of polio infection, the mouth is the portal of entry of the virus. The fecal-oral route is the route. So the virus enters from our mouth. The primary multiplication of the virus occurs at the site of implantation in the pharynx and gastrointestinal tract. The virus is usually present in the throat and in the stool before the onset of the illness. So before the onset only, the patient is setting the virus in their stools. 1 week after the onset, there is little virus in the throat, but virus continues to be excreted in the stool for several weeks. Okay, so after 1 week, the oropharyngeal discharge of the virus is less. Once in the stool, it will continue. The virus will invade the local lymphoid tissue, and after invading that, it will enter the bloodstream and then will infect the cells of the central nervous system, leading to paralytic polio. The replication of poliovirus occurs in the motor neurons of the anterior horns and the brainstem, which result in the cell destruction of those motor neurons and causing the typical manifestation of poliomyelitis, that is flaccid paralysis. Now, if you see the clinical features, in 90 to 95% of the patients who get poliovirus infection, the infection is inapparent. The child who is getting that infection will show no symptoms. Okay. Of 5 to 10% who are remaining, they will only have the symptoms of polio, and still those symptoms will be categorized as different syndromes: abortive polio, non-paralytic aseptic meningitis, paralytic poliomyelitis, spinal paralytic poliomyelitis, and polioencephalitis. So abortive polio. So see, 90 to 95% nothing is happening. Nobody is knowing that the patient has been inculcated with poliovirus infection. Now, out of those 5 to 10% only who is going to show any symptoms, even of them, 4 to 8% of the infections. That means out of the total 100%. Okay, 90% no problem. A 4 to 8% will show abortive polio. Okay. So abortive polio is very mild illness with low-grade fever, mild sore throat, vomiting, abdominal pain, loss of appetite, and little bit of malaise, body ache, different things. Okay, just like other viral illnesses. So there will be complete and rapid recovery. In this patient also, you will not be able to see any paralysis. So you will not be able to differentiate from other virus illnesses. So you will also label this patient who is an abortive polio infection, that patient has also a viral illness of unknown cause. Okay, so this patient will also be not diagnosed as a polio, because we in Nepal we generally do not do all the serological studies to know which virus is being affecting the patient. Okay, so when there is a mild viral illness, we don't do a lot of tests, so we don't know that the patient has been affected with the polio virus. Okay, so now rest 1 to 2% of the infections, okay, those will also be 1% or 2% non-paralytic aseptic meningitis. So these patients will also have mild headache, backache, little bit of leg stiffness several days after the prodromal symptoms of viral fever, a little bit of sore throat, mild abdominal pain, vomiting. After that, after several days of that, this patient who is going into non-paralytic aseptic meningitis, he will have headache, little bit of back and leg stiffness. Okay, but this patient will also recover within 2 to 10 days. He will not go into any paralysis. Okay, that's why it is known as non-paralytic and meningitis, because he will show symptoms of meningism. Okay, neck rigidity, leg stiffness, but he will also, that child will also improve. Okay, now, so the main polio patients which we see as a paralytic polio, only 0.5 to 1% of the total 100% infection, only 0.5 to 1% will show symptoms of paralytic polio. Okay, and this also symptom occurs in two phases. One is minor phase, another is major phase. In the minor phase, he will have the symptoms same as the abortive polio. Okay, so simple viral illness, mild fever, little bit of sore throat, little bit of vomiting, abdominal symptoms. Okay, so he will have a minor phase. After that, he will have again, first there will be a mild viral illness. After that, he will have severe muscle pains, spasms, and there will be a return of fever. And these two phases, there will be a gap in between. Okay, in between the minor and major phase, there will be a gap of few days, maybe 7 to 14 days, in which there will be no symptoms. Okay, so that patient will come to you now as a fever, muscle pain, and spasm of the muscles, difficulty in walking, and within 72 hours, that patient will have flaccid paralysis. Okay, so when this major phase occurs, he will have paralysis, which will be complete paralysis within 72 hours. Okay, so any patient who comes to you as a flaccid paralysis, as a features of muscle pain, spasm, you have to take a history of minor illness 2 weeks prior to that. Okay, because the minor phase has already been gone. This is a major phase, and if you miss that minor phase, you will not suspect poliomyelitis. So generally in a paralytic poliomyelitis, there may be a feature of prodromal illness few days to 2 weeks prior to his major illness. Okay, we should take that history also. And if you see, so this is very less number of the infection which is going into paralytic polio, but that small number is also a big burden to our community. That's why polio vaccine and polio is not considered a very good disease. So we are actually working hard for the vaccinations so as to prevent this 0.5 to 1% of the patients. Okay. Now next is another type is a spinal paralytic poliomyelitis. So it is the most common paralytic polio. It results from the lower motor neuron lesion of the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord, and it affects the muscles of the leg, arms, and trunk. Okay. Severe cases may develop quadriplegia and paralysis of trunk, abdominal, and thoracic muscles. So the affected muscles are floppy, and if you check the reflexes are diminished or absent. But in that area, the sense of pain and touch will be there. So it's only a motor illness. Sensory part will be intact. The paralysis is often asymmetrical, means it will affect legs more than the arms. It will not be equal paralysis in upper limb. So in the lower limb, the motor part will be absent nearly. While in the upper limb, you may have little bit of motor power. Okay, So you are just third year, you have not done CNS examination. So in CNS exam, we do the power, we categorize the power in terms of 5. So the maximum good power is 5 and minimum power is 0. Okay, so we give it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in the legs, the power will be 0 and in the upper limb it may be 1 or 2 power. So there is asymmetry in the paralysis of upper limb and lower limb. Paralysis usually begins proximally and then affects the distal muscles. So it is known as descending paralysis. So proximal means, so earlier the patient will not be able to sit, get up from the sitting position. Means his thigh muscles will be more weak, then his calf muscles will be more weak. Okay, so descending paralysis from above to down. So this is very important to do the differential diagnosis basically. So residual flaccid paralysis usually can be present up to 60 days. Then is a word known as bulbar paralysis or bulbar polio. It is seen in 2% of the cases. It results from the cranial nerve lesion resulting in respiratory insufficiency, difficulty in speaking, swallowing or eating. So see bulbar means in the brain, okay? So in the brain some cranial nerve lesion is associated with this virus infection leading to, because this bulbar area, this is basically the medulla where there is a control for the respiratory system and control for our swallowing, speaking and eating from the pharynx and larynx area. So this area, the cranial nerves of this area will be affected, leading to difficulty in respiratory difficulty. So if patient goes into a respiratory insufficiency, definitely the patient will require mechanical ventilation. Okay, so it is a very severe form, bulbar paralysis, and you have to work very hard. And whenever the patient is saying that he is having difficulty in swallowing or difficulty in speaking, the patient is not speaking very good, he has a slurred speech, it means the patient is going into a bulbar paralysis, and you have to quickly make an access for the mechanical ventilator beside, because the patient may quickly go into respiratory arrest within hours, and you may have to intubate the patient and put it on a ventilator. Okay, so this is a very bad prognostic feature if the patient goes into a bulbar paralysis. Okay, another is a bulbospinal polio. So means bulb of the brain is also affected, medullary area is affected along with the spinal area is affected, which accounts for 20% of the paralytic folios, and it's a combination of bulbar and spinal paralytic. Okay, then last type is the polioencephalitis. So it is characterized by irritability, delirium and loss of consciousness. Seizures may occur, may not occur. Paralysis may be of oculomotor neuron types. See, so we have 5 types. Okay, so I told you in this one only. So out of 90 to 95%, we don't find any infection. In 5 to 10%, in abortive polio, 4 to 8% generally go into abortive polio. You don't find. 1 to 2% go into non-paralytic septicemia. You don't even know that it's poliomyelitis. So paralytic polio, spinal paralytic poliomyelitis, and polioencephalitis. These are the things where you suspect poliomyelitis. You send tests. You do different tests to diagnose poliomyelitis. Okay, so this is only 1 to 2% patients. And even in the polioencephalitis, you may not find pure paralysis. The patient in this polioencephalitis will be showing the features of encephalitis. So seizures, delirium, that will be shown. Okay. So basically it has a wide range of presentations. So in this kind of presentation, you should suspect polio, because nowadays we don't find very much polio cases. But if we miss even a one case, that polio patient is going to spread it in the community. Okay, so that's why we have to diagnose polio diagnose the patient's condition, whether it is polio or not, and we can diagnose only when we suspect it. That's why these clinical features should always be in your mind. Older children and adults are at the greater risk of developing paralytic illness. Okay, so in the smaller children, generally they are non-abortive polio and non-recognized infection, but in later on it may be more giving paralysis. Residual paralysis. So following an acute phase of illness of 1 to 4 weeks, the recovery of paralyzed muscles begins. Okay, after 1 month, the paralysis muscles start to recover. The extent of recovery is variable. Maximum recovery occurs within the first 6 months, and very slow recovery can occur till 2 years post illness. And after 2 years, we should not expect any recovery. Okay, and that post polio residual paralysis which will persist throughout the life. Okay, so after 2 years, if you find any person 2 years has already occurred and now you assess the patient and you find residual paralysis, that paralysis is rarely recoverable. So we only can do is a physiotherapy. So diagnosis. So diagnosis is basically based on the history and clinical examination. That's why we have been focusing a lot on the history and clinical examination. Okay. So this is a viral illness. In countries like ours, diagnosis of viral illness is really difficult because we don't have much serological tests available. So we are basically diagnosing on the case of history and clinical examination. When you suspect a patient by history and clinical examination that it can be a poliomyelitis, we send a stool examination for virus detection. So generally virus can be detected from the onset of illness to maximum 8 weeks. And best within the first 2 weeks, virus can be detected in the stool examination of the patient. Okay. So WHO is basically doing stool examination in all the acute flaccid paralysis cases. Okay, that is the AFP surveillance part. Then in such cases, we do a CSF examination. In the CSF examination, we definitely see for cell count, protein, that will give us idea of whether it is polio or not, but it will not diagnose 100%. Okay. So basically, CSF examination will also rule out the other causes causing the acute flaccid paralysis. Now, serological tests. Generally, in serological tests, we do the antibody testing of the poliovirus. Very less available in our country, but if very much suspected, we can send it to the central laboratory and they can send it further to diagnose. But the current serological tests which are available, they cannot differentiate whether this is a wild virus strain or a vaccine associated infection. Okay, so this is also a drawback, and people are working on it. So regarding the differential diagnosis, so Guillain-Barré syndrome and transverse myelitis, these are the two big terms, big names which always accompany poliomyelitis. So poliomyelitis is basically a disease in which the patient will present to you as a paralysis that will be of flaccid type. That means the muscles will have no reflexes or very diminished reflexes. So in that case, Guillain-Barré is a syndrome which is again a viral, any infection is again a syndrome which occurs after some viral illness. And so this is a very common disease in pediatric children, not exactly a common, but it is a disease which is commonly causing flaccid paralysis in children. So we should always get confused with these two. And how do we differentiate it? We send the stool sample for virus examination, and then we do CSF analysis. We sometimes do MRI brain to diagnose Guillain-Barré. Then transverse myelitis, it means that in the spinal area there is some problem. So in that case, we do MRI of the spine also in transverse myelitis, and even in transverse myelitis, we send the stool sample and we do the CSF analysis to differentiate. Okay, clinically also we have few differentiating points we will do for the acute flaccid paralysis class. Okay, but Guillain-Barré and transverse myelitis should always be our differential diagnosis, and we should try to rule out whether it is these or poliomyelitis, because the treatment part for Guillain-Barré and transverse myelitis is a little bit different from the poliomyelitis. So we should differentiate it very quickly and start treatment according to. Then it's traumatic neuritis. Again, so trauma to the spinal cord will cause similar kind of flaccid paralysis. Sometimes if it is just a non-paralytic poliomyelitis, or if it is a encephalitis, so we cannot differentiate whether it is meningitis or encephalitis by other causes. Okay, so it can be a DD. You should always keep in mind. Then illnesses which are produced by the toxins like diphtheria toxin and botulinum toxin, they can also mimic sometimes like a poliomyelitis, because even in the botulism toxin you will have paralysis. So regarding the management, the treatment of the pain with analgesics is very important, because when the patient is having severe paralysis and at that time the muscle pain is very severe, muscle spasm is also there. So we should treat those pains with analgesics. If you suspect some secondary infections, then we can start some antibiotic, because the patient is coming as paralysis and they may be having severe pain. Sometimes you may suspect muscles inflammation or infection of the muscles. You may sometimes suspect aseptic arthritis. So in that case, if you think that there is some associated infection, you may give some antibiotic, but we don't give for polio, confirmed poliovirus. Okay. Fluid therapy. The patient will not be able to take the oral fluid, feed properly. So at that time, we may have to give a proper fluid. Bed rest until the fever is reduced. Giving a bed rest is very important. Adequate diet. The dietary management, nutrition of the patient should be taken care at that time. Minimal exertion and little bit of exercise. Okay. So exercise, because the muscles are already in fatigue stage. In that case, we don't do more over fatigue with the overexertion. Hot packs or heating pads for the muscle pain can also be helpful. So sometimes if the patient is going, you are suspecting that the patient may go into paralytic poliomyelitis, at that time you may need to hospitalize the patient, because you don't know which patient is going to into bulbar poliomyelitis, okay, bulbar paralysis. So at that time you need to hospitalize. If the respiratory muscles are nearly about to be involved, then you may have some long-term ventilation required for the patient. Okay, bulbar paralysis may not come out of the ventilator very quickly. You may need a long-term ventilation. Okay, so physiotherapy. So little bit during the state of illness, physiotherapy is required, and it is more required when it is in the recovery phase. Okay, place the child on firm mattresses with support for feet. Change the position frequently. So basically the supportive care. Encourage for oral fluids and feeds. And sometimes the patient may have, because of the paralysis, the patient may not have the proper bowel and bladder movement. So he may not be able to void properly. So sometimes catheterization of the bladder may be required. Okay. So during the recovery phase, physiotherapy helping the ambulation of the patient and prevention of the deformities is very important. So prolonged rehabilitation may be necessary, including the braces, splints, and sometimes surgeries. Okay, so that's in the recovery phase. You may require orthopedic surgery a lot of times. So because the disease, even if it's only 0.5 to 1% in which it is going into paralysis, it's not very good disease, because it leaves a lot of burden on the community and on the family and on the patient. Okay, so he's crippled if he is having some residual paralytic features, then he is a burden throughout the life for himself even. So that's why prevention is the best therapy. So best preventive measure for poliomyelitis is ensure hygiene and encourage a good sanitation practice. See, it's a fecal-oral transmission. So if person is not taking bad water, bad food, which is contaminated with poliovirus, they will not get the virus and will never be going to have an infection. So that is hygiene, but we cannot give that very quickly. Okay, so developing countries like Nepal, it's really difficult to say that ensure good sanitation practices just by saying it doesn't get insured, isn't it? So that's why, so what we can do is a vaccination. So polio vaccine is a boon to our human population. Okay, it's really a boon. So you see 99% has been eradicated. Only 1% is still there, for which we are working so hard. So polio vaccine has been developed against all three subtypes of polioviruses, and it is very effective in producing protective antibodies that induce immunity against the poliovirus and provides protection from the paralytic polio. Okay. So there are two types of vaccine which are available. First, one is injectable inactivated polio vaccine, and another is oral polio vaccine, live attenuated. Okay, so injectable is inactivated; it cannot replicate. So it is inactivated. So when it goes inside your body, it doesn't replicate, and it cannot be shed in the stool of a vaccinated person. But it does not cause any vaccine-associated paralysis. So it's used It's very safe to use in immunocompromised persons or in household contacts of the immunodeficient persons. Okay, so it is, but it's an injection, so it's sometimes not very accepted by people, and it's a little bit expensive. Okay, oral polio vaccine, it's easy to administer. It is less expensive. It has very good intestinal immunity. Okay, so when it goes inside, it can replicate and it can be shed in the stool of the vaccinated person. Okay, vaccine can be shed, and it may, but it may cause a vaccine-associated paralysis. Okay, because it's a uh, live vaccine. So sometimes some virus may produce vaccine-associated paralysis. Okay. So regarding the prognosis, the outlook depends on the form of the disease. Okay. So I already told you, if it's subclinical, abortive, no problem. No, we will not be able to see even. But if it's paralytic, then it's definitely a problem. And the body area which is affected. So spinal, less; bulbar, very severe, isn't it? So the prognosis depends upon that. Most of the time, complete recovery is likely if the spinal cord and brain are not involved. See, non-paralytic polio, that is complete recovery. Brain and spinal cord are involved, then it is a medical emergency that may result in paralysis and sometimes death if it is causing a respiratory involvement also. And disability is more common death than death. Okay, so polymyelitis is rarely causing mortality. So basically, morbidity by the paralysis is commonly seen. Okay, so with that, I end my class. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, we can take few questions.